All right, let's dive into something that, well, it sparks a lot of curiosity, debate, maybe even a little wonder. Those unidentified things in our skies.
Uh-huh. UFOs, UAPs, whatever term people use, the mystery definitely hangs around.
It really does. And it feels like the topic has genuinely moved out of the fringe.
Absolutely. It's being discussed now in government halls, driven by official reports, legislation attempts, and some pretty compelling accounts from credible people.
Exactly. And you, our listener, you've actually given us this fascinating stack of sources, articles, reports, expert takes, all trying to get at that core question. What does the government actually know?
And why is it so difficult to get a straight answer, Frank?
Yeah. So our mission here for this deep dive is to take these sources you gave us, really unpack them together.
Pull out the key insights, the different perspectives presented. We want to understand the landscape based specifically on what's in these documents you shared.
And it's a really diverse set of materials. We're talking government reports, policy stuff.
Expert analysis, claims from a film, even looking into the public chatter, and, importantly, the personal impact this whole thing has.
It's definitely complex, but the sources kind of give us a map to navigate it.
And what's interesting right off the bat is how these sources highlight this core tension.
Which is,
Well, there's this undeniable growing concern about unidentified objects in our airspace. It's not just like public fascination anymore.
it feels more serious. National security worries, right? And more actual sightings being documented.
Especially from military pilots, yeah. That's a big driver.
And the sources do acknowledge, look, governments keep secrets. That's a given. Especially about advanced tech aerospace capabilities.
Sure, surveillance methods, things like that. It's standard practice.
But the question these sources raise is, okay, are the secrets around UAP sightings just about our own classified tech being misidentified?
Or is it something else entirely? And then, how much does the government really understand versus what's still genuinely unknown?
Because the sources seem to stress that whatever the origin, the operational need to simply identify what's flying around.
Is more critical now than ever. You need to know what's in your airspace.
Okay. So stepping into this complex arena, one source brings up a pretty explosive perspective. The idea of a long-standing government cover-up.
Yes, the cover-up allegation.
Tell me about that. One source talks about a new film, The Age of Disclosure, makes some big claims.
It does, reportedly. It alleges an 80-year cover-up by the U.S. government.
Covering up what specifically?
Evidence of potential extraterrestrial visitors, and crucially, these secret programs supposedly trying to reverse engineer recovered non-human craft.
Wow, okay. 80 years.
And it apparently goes further, claiming other countries like Russia and China are trying to do the same thing.
And the film bases this on interviews.
Yeah, it reportedly includes interviews with quite a few government, military, and intelligence officials, so it's positioning itself as having inside knowledge.
Okay, but then the sources immediately pivot, right? They offer a counterpoint.
Exactly. A different perspective from someone who was actually involved in an official investigation. They bring in Joshua Semeter.
He's a professor at Boston University.
That's right. And he served on that 2023 NASA panel that was specifically tasked with looking into UAP evidence.
So how does someone like Semeter, coming from that official panel perspective, react to these kinds of, huge cover-up claims?
Well, he expresses skepticism. And the sources mention a critique from a Hollywood Reporter review of the film.
What did the review say?
Basically, that while the film makes claims and interviewees hint they know more, it reportedly doesn't prove the central allegations. Lots of assertion, but lacking verifiable evidence, apparently.
And Semeter's perspective comes from actually being on that NASA panel, looking at the data they had access to.
Right. And the sources detail the key conclusions and recommendations from that panel.
What were they? What did the panel emphasize?
The number one thing, really foundational, was the need for better data, much better data. Simultaneous observations. Getting data from different sensors, radar, infrared, optical, all looking at the same thing at the same time from different places.
Okay, that makes sense. Multiple viewpoints, multiple sensor types give you a clearer picture than just, say, one blurry video.
Precisely. You reduce ambiguity. Second, they stressed using a rigorous, disciplined, scientific approach for analysis.
Meaning, don't jump to conclusions.
Basically, yeah. Sabater specifically cautioned against sensational explanations, suggesting those can sometimes be driven by emotional bias or maybe people looking for attention.
Which definitely cuts to the heart of some of the online chatter around this.
It does. Third, the panel said it's crucial to get rid of the stigma around reporting UAPs.
Especially for military pilots, right, who might have worried about their careers.
Exactly. They might have hesitated to report something strange for fear of ridicule or professional harm. So creating a safe reporting channel was key.
Makes sense. What else?
And finally, they called for more cooperation and transparency between different government agencies: NASA, DoD, FAA, NOAA.
Because they all have different pieces of the puzzle, different expertise, different sensors.
That's the idea, recognizing they each bring something different to the table.
Okay, so let's circle back to that 80-year cover-up claim, hiding alien encounters, recovered tech. What was Symmeter's direct response to that, given his panel work?
He's pretty direct in the sources. Based on what he reviewed for the panel, he says, quote, "I have seen no evidence that the government has been hiding anything."
Okay. But the immediate counter-argument from a believer would be, well, of course you haven't seen it. It's hidden.
And he acknowledges that exact point. He says if the response is just, "you haven't seen it because it's hidden," well, that creates a kind of logical impasse. It's hard to argue against.
Yeah, that really highlights why this debate often feels so stuck.
It does. Senator also offers another perspective on why some related government info is classified.
What's his take on that?
He suggests it's often about protecting our own technological capabilities from potential adversaries.
Yeah.
Like revealing details about how good our sensors are, or our surveillance methods, or maybe advanced aircraft programs.
So the classification might be about how we see things or what we can build, not necessarily hiding the object itself.
That's the distinction he draws, yeah. It often gets blurred in the public discussion.
And it's interesting, one source notes, Semeter isn't really keen on watching documentaries based purely on testimony.
Right. He suggests there's probably not much new evidence for him in those, quote, except perhaps in the realm of psychology.
And the source mentions his comment about the former director of Aero resigning.
Yeah, Aero, the Pentagon's UAP office. Senator noted the resignation happened partly amid ongoing conspiratorial beliefs held by some involved, even when evidence seemed to contradict those beliefs. It points to the challenge of bias, even within the system trying to investigate.
Which kind of leads into the challenges of observation and interpretation itself, doesn't it? The sources talk about Semeter's points on how sensors and perception can create anomalies.
You really do. It's crucial. He explains how different cameras see differently. An infrared camera measures heat.
So it gives a totally different view than regular visible light.
Exactly. An object could even seem to disappear briefly in infrared if its temperature perfectly matches the background for a moment.
Or technical glitches like focusing issues.
Right. Focusing problems, internal reflections in the optics, they can make an object look like it has a weird structure it doesn't actually have.
And then there's parallax. That sounds important.
Hugely important. If your sensor, say on a fast-moving jet, is moving rapidly, even a stationary object like a balloon can look like it's zipping across the sky at incredible speed relative to the background.
Because your viewpoint is changing so fast.
Precisely. And Semeter points out that many of the really famous UAP videos, the ones often cited, were recorded with infrared cameras, where these effects can really influence what you think you're seeing.
So what looks like impossible flight characteristics could, in some cases discussed, be an illusion tied to the sensor or the observer's motion.
That's a key scientific perspective presented, yes.
Hmm.
But the sources also look at other scientific efforts, trying to be balanced.
Like SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Yeah, they mentioned SETI, noting it's becoming more mainstream, and also the Breakthrough Listen project.
That's described as the biggest systematic search program going, right?
It is, and they recently did a huge data review from nearby galaxies. Found nothing artificial yet, but the sources frame it appropriately as just a start. It's a massive undertaking.
And then there's that really intriguing work by Beatrice Villarreal's team looking at old data.
Yeah, that's fascinating. They're examining old astronomical photographic plates from before 1957.
Why before 57?
To rule out satellites, basically. They're looking for anomalies that can't be explained by modern aircraft or known space objects.
And they found things, genuinely strange things.
According to the source, yes. One plate from 1950 apparently showed 9 light sources appearing and then vanishing within about half an hour. No standard astronomical explanation.
Wow.
And maybe even more provocatively, a plate from 1952 had 3 vanishing stars that seemed to coincide in time and location with that famous Washington, D.C. flap.
The one where pilots and radar reported lights over the Capitol?
That's the one. So finding historical data anomalies that seem to line up with historical sighting reports, That's definitely noteworthy.
And Villarreal's point is about searching closer to home, too, right?
Exactly. She emphasizes looking nearby, even among Earth's satellites, not just distant stars. She's planning a project called Exoprobe for that.
Okay. So, we've got official panels needing better data, scientific searches ongoing, these strange historical anomalies. How did all this renewed interest, especially the public side, translate into actual policy attempts? The sources cover recent legislation, too.
They do. That increased attention, fueled partly by whistleblower claims like David Grush's about retrieved non-human craft.
That definitely generated headlines.
It really did. And it spurred some actual legislative proposals in Congress.
Like the UAP Disclosure Act you mentioned.
Yes, that one. It was spearheaded by a bipartisan group, importantly including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
And the goal was?
The stated intent was pretty bold. Mandate the controlled release of classified government documents related to UAPs and potentially even physical materials or artifacts, if they exist.
And they modeled it on something specific.
Yeah, explicitly on the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act. The thinking was that act aimed to restore public trust through declassification and an independent review board.
So apply that same model transparency plus independent oversight to the UAP issue.
That was the idea. And the initial proposal, according to the sources, was quite strong.
What did it include originally?
That crucial independent review board. It also proposed giving the government eminent domain power.
Meaning?
The power to potentially seize any UAP evidence or recovered tech held by private companies or individuals. And it even mandated seeking disclosure from foreign governments.
That sounds ambitious.
Very.
Yeah.
But then, as the sources highlight, there was a major twist.
Right. It got significantly changed at the last minute to pass Congress. Watered down.
That's the key point, hammered home.
Yeah.
Several crucial elements were stripped out.
Like what got removed?
Most notably, that independent review board. Gone. The eminent domain power over private evidence, also removed. And the mandate to seek foreign disclosure, that was taken out too.
So the core teeth of the bill, the parts designed to force disclosure and ensure independent oversight, were basically removed.
That seems to be the assessment of the sources, yes. And the reactions cited were
Stromer's reaction.
Yeah. He called the archive part a major win, but removing the review board was, quote, an outrage. He essentially said declassification is now left to the very agencies accused of blocking it for decades.
And David Grush, the whistleblower, his reported reaction was even stronger.
Called it the greatest legislative failure in American history. Pretty stark language.
And the sources point to a consequence here, right? This lack of mandated transparency.
It's not building trust. Clinical psychologist Daniel Stubbings is cited, saying that by not being fully open, the government inadvertently fuels the suspicion that it is hiding something major.
So the attempt at transparency kind of backfired, potentially increasing suspicion instead of reducing it.
That's the dynamic the sources describe, and this really brings us to the human element, the psychological side of all this, which the sources also explore.
Like Stubbings' research you mentioned, interviewing people who believed they saw unexplained things.
Right. He found they weren't just one type of person, they were diverse, and often had unmet psychological needs around processing these really unusual experiences.
And he shifted his own view.
He did. Went from skepticism to finding the topic very credible. He called it a potential game changer, if it turns out to be real, but also deeply concerning, even if it's not, just because of the impact it's having on people and public discourse.
And the sources talk a lot about the stigma.
A huge amount. People being genuinely frightened to share their experiences, fearing ridicule, being labeled unstable.
Which is where people like physicist John Priestland come in, his organization Unhidden.
Exactly. Their goal is to reduce that stigma, offer support. Priestland specifically voices concern that the government hasn't really thought about the potential psychological fallout for the public if some kind of major disclosure were to happen suddenly.
Yeah, that's a powerful point made, and the sources society seems to accept my truth on many things now. But people who see strange things in the sky often don't get that same courtesy. They need support, not dismissal.
And you can imagine the potential shockwave described. Yeah. Billions potentially having to rethink their place in the universe.
And being told this news by the very institutions that many now suspect have been misleading them for, well, maybe 80 years. That's a huge trust issue baked in.
Massive. Finally, the sources give us a glimpse into the public conversation itself through comments on one of the articles.
To get a sense of the divided views out there.
Exactly. You see a lot of criticism aimed at the expert skepticism, people commenting that official panels don't get the real data.
Or that experts are lazy,
Or
bias.
even that science itself is acting like a kind of dogma, preventing them from seeing evidence that commenters feel is obvious, a real distrust there.
What else comes up in those public comments?
You get alternative viewpoints, specific claims, simple personal sighting stories, allegations of historical disinformation, like questioning dates on old spy plane photos.
And specific UAP cases often get brought up as proof, right?
Constantly. The Nimitz Tic Tac encounter, the JAL 1628 Alaska sighting, often with specific figures for speed or acceleration like thousands of Gs, things far beyond known tech.
And the argument is that this evidence is out there and experts are just ignoring it.
That's a very common thread, yes. People point to this data, or recent passive radar findings, as proof that something tangible and anomalous exists.
There's also that point about classified technology again.
Right. People acknowledge protecting military secrets is valid, but argue there needs to be a balance. If some UAP-related secrecy is hiding advanced human tech, maybe some of that could benefit society if declassified.
But who decides? The argument is you need a review independent of the military to make that call.
Exactly. That need for independent oversight comes up again.
Okay, so pulling back, looking at everything we've walked through from these sources, the mystery, the cover-up claims versus the official no evidence stance, the push for better science, the weird data points, the failed transparency bill, the human cost, the divided public. What's the big picture takeaway here?
Well, based only on these sources you provided, it's crystal clear there's no single easy answer. Not yet, anyway. Not at all. What you get is this complex tapestry of conflicting accounts, this urgent call for better, standardized data.
Major questions about government transparency and whether current efforts are actually working or backfiring.
And the very real human impact, the psychological weight of uncertainty, the stigma people face.
It feels like a topic just suspended between, I don't know, frustrating confusion and potentially reality-shattering importance.
That sums it up well. And one source leaves us with this really powerful thought to consider.
What's that?
It points out that amidst all the debate and doubt, quote, it only takes one account or piece of evidence to be real, and it changes the narrative of humanity forever.
Just one. Think about the sheer weight of that possibility, and then think about how incredibly difficult it seems to be, based on everything we've just discussed in this deep dive, to get the clear, transparent information needed to find out if that one actually exists. It really leaves you wondering what it would take to finally move past all this uncertainty.